People are quiet, so it must be time to start. Grace to you and peace in Jesus Christ our Lord, for being here at 10:10 on the Christian Education Hour here in the Parish Hall. Oftentimes it's a class, old-fashioned Sunday school, but as you've heard, from time to time we have a Dean's Forum or a Sunday Forum with special guests, and we have such a special guest this morning. I'm going to let the Mitchner introduce our guest, because Julia is now the canon who's been organizing our annual Homeless Requiem. This Wednesday is our 5th annual Homeless Requiem. Thank you, Julia and others who are putting this together. It's going to be a great time. As a way to prepare for that, we've got this morning's presentation with Cathryn Vassell. Julia, would you come introduce her, please?
Thank you. Before I introduce Cathryn, I'd like to invite us to join in the word of prayer. The Lord be with you. Let us pray. Gracious God, you came among us in your Son, Jesus, in a newborn infant who had no place to lay his head. Raise, O God, we pray, our awareness of and our responsiveness to all of our sisters and brothers throughout our community, the country, and the world who lack the basic necessities that all people need to live and thrive. Grow us in our compassion, in our advocacy, in our willingness to work for justice, so that all your children might have a place to call home. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. So today, as Dean Candler said, we do have the great privilege, and it really is a privilege to have Cathryn Vassell, who is CEO of Partners for Home, which is really she is a mover and shaker, and Partners for Home is a mover and shaker, really one of the prime movers and shakers in Metro Atlanta for addressing the issue of homelessness and housing insecurity. And Cathryn has worked passionately. She has devoted her life and work for over 25 years, I believe now, to advocating for the most vulnerable among us, particularly as it concerns housing and getting everyone the shelter that all people need and deserve. In addition to having a law degree, a JD from Georgia State University, I believe, Cathryn, you got your bachelor's from the University of Wisconsin, and you also bring to your work, you're a Renaissance woman, which I know is needed in this line of work. You also have a master's in social work, I believe. So Cathryn brings a lot of education and a lot of experience and a lot of passion and leadership to the table. And she has been involved in the most recent planning with the City of Atlanta, the mayor's office, and all sorts of local agencies, including the faith community, to come out with a new community plan to reduce and end homelessness in Atlanta. So without further ado, thank you, Cathryn.
Sure, thank you so much, Julia, and thank you for having me this morning. It is really always a pleasure to speak with faith communities in Atlanta, because it's not lost on us that the work of ending homelessness really stands on the shoulders of our faith communities in Atlanta and largely all over the country. And the Episcopal Diocese of Atlanta is no stranger to that and really has been at the forefront of helping our system advance to end homelessness for many, many, many years. So the Cathedral and St. Luke's in particular, both of those congregations have really been pivotal in assisting our system and advancing our work. So we are truly grateful. Before I came into this role, I was at Mercy Care, which is our healthcare for the homeless organization, where I did lead behavioral health efforts there across all of our clinics. And one of my stations was at Crossroads, which is in the basement of St. Luke's Church downtown, and that was one of my favorite places to do outreach, working with people experiencing homelessness. We are also incredibly grateful to the Cathedral for the Requiem and y'all's acknowledgement and honoring of people who have lost their lives while experiencing homelessness, as well as the Antique Roadshow, among many other things that you all are doing to contribute to this issue. And then last but not least, on a personal note, Reverend Lauren Holder, we had the privilege of having Reverend Lauren Holder marry my husband and I at St. Luke's. So we have many, many ties to the Episcopal Church. With that, I'll get into it and really just want to give y'all a little bit of background. We won't dive too deep because what you'll find is the homeless system gets very complicated very fast. The work that we do is very intricate and involves many different systems and the leveraging and alignment of many different systems. And so I don't want to confuse you too much or inundate you too much with too much information, but going to give you some background, going to tell you a little bit about some of our progress, and then talk a little bit about some of our new initiatives with our new strat plan and some of the work ahead of us. And happy to take questions along the way, so feel free to jump in and ask questions as you have them. I also, this is a system and an industry that speaks in acronym speak, and so if I do that accidentally and you're not sure what I'm talking about, feel free to stop me and I will explain those things as well. So a continuum of care, or a COC, as we call it, is really a HUD, a Federal Housing and Urban Development. It's a funding stream that comes from HUD. And there's almost 400 COCs around the country. Every continuum of care, or every community that gets COC dollars, is required to appoint a lead agency, or what we call the collaborative applicant. And HUD at the federal system has actually been very instrumental in really charging communities to think strategically about how we come together collaboratively, how we leverage and align resources across all the different public and private funding sources to really create greater impact in the homeless space. And I think as a federal entity, I wouldn't always speak kindly of the government, but in this instance, I think HUD has done a really, really tremendous job of saying, if you get this money, you have to be, you have to show us what you're doing with this money. You have to do a good job of coordinating and aligning those resources. And to that end, they have said that having that collaborative applicant is critical. They believe strongly that every community needs that lead agency. And so Atlanta, back in 2015, they looked around the country and at many different communities, and they said, you know, we really can't do this with the public sector alone. We have to be able to leverage the private sector. And so in a very strategic moment in time, this design committee decided to stand up a nonprofit, or a 501c3. And that's when Partners for Home was created. So we are created to promote that community-wide commitment to the goal of ending homelessness. We, unlike most nonprofits in homelessness, do not provide direct services. Many of us at the organization came out of the direct service field, as did myself. But our job is really to be that umbrella organization, to be the quarterback, the coach, whatever metaphor you want to use, to work alongside all of the homeless service providers to create and execute that strategy. So we have a governing council. That is our community board that oversees the continuum of care, that creates and approves policy for how the continuum operates. As a nonprofit, we have our own board, of course, and then we have the membership. And the membership is just the makeup of all of the homeless service providers, places like Crossroads, Gateway, the Mission, and then our permanent housing providers, et cetera. So as I said, our job is to sort of be all of those things. We are the coordinator. We do disperse funds. We really see ourselves as an innovator. Our role is to really advance evidence-based solutions. And we'll talk about that in just a moment. And then the other big component of what we do is accountability and driving performance and looking at how our system is performing on a regular basis. So the providers that get money from Continuum of Care funds are required to compete for that money annually. We actually run that competition annually and have to package that application to go up to HUD every year. And agencies no longer get that money. It used to be that that money was rubber stamped annually years ago. No one was really looking at what are they doing with the money? How are they performing? Are they doing a good job at keeping people from coming back into homelessness, reducing returns, exiting people to permanent housing, et cetera? And so now we've instituted systems and policies where agencies have to perform. They have to show us what they're doing with the money. And if they're not performing, they're at risk of losing funds. And we have had agencies lose funds as a result of non-performance. And so you've probably heard this term before, housing first. It's becoming quite sort of a household name. It's also become rather politicized over the last several years. But that said, our system uses housing first as our foundation. It's really just our philosophical approach to the work. It doesn't mean that somebody can't go to treatment first, right, if that's what they want and desire and need. But what it really means is that we're no longer going to force people experiencing homelessness to jump through these hoops and prove their worthiness for housing. What it means instead is that if I do have mental health issues, if I don't have a job and need a job, if I have addiction issues, if I have chronic medical conditions, I can't resolve any of those things without a roof over my head. I can't do them while I'm in shelter. I definitely can't do it while I'm sleeping under a bridge. And so housing first is just really this notion, and actually it's also an evidence-based practice that has a plethora of data to support its efficacy, that housing is the foundation by which we do everything else. And it's not housing only, so people get confused by that, but it's housing with supportive services to help individuals achieve the goals and preferences that they have identified they want for their life. And so with that, on top of the data that supports housing first as an effective practice, we also know that, and a recent study has come out that was published this past spring, actually by some professors out of the University of Washington. They published this book called Homelessness is a Housing Problem. They tested a range of all these conventional beliefs that people think about when they think what must be driving homelessness in communities. And they looked at all different kinds of cities to try to control for regional variations. So cities like Detroit and Washington, D.C., Indianapolis. And then they also looked at cities like Chicago and all the cities along the West Coast that have seen explosions in homelessness. And they said that none of the factors that you would assume, mental illness, drug use, weather, poverty, et cetera, really could answer what was driving regional variations in homelessness, except for two factors, and that is the price of housing, availability of affordable housing, and the availability of that affordable housing, essentially. So what we know at the end of the day, although there are many complicating factors, right, that exacerbate somebody's homelessness, that might cause somebody to come into homelessness over someone else, the two driving forces are really the availability of deeply, deeply affordable housing. And so with that, the good news is that we also know that the cost of keeping someone in homelessness is more expensive than housing them. And so when we look at what it costs to house people in continued homelessness, even in things like sanctioned encampments that are also popping up as proposals for temporary solutions around the country, we know that actually some of our permanent housing solutions, like rapid rehousing and supportive housing, are actually much more cost effective, and they get us the answer and solution that we're looking for, which is ending a person's homelessness rather than managing their homelessness. And so just want to jump in to some of the work that has been done to date to that end. Our initial 5-year plan actually just concluded, and we just launched our newest plan. And much of the work over the last 5 years has really been around how do we leverage and align public resources that already exist, new resources to scale housing solutions. And I'll share a little bit about some of what we did to that end. But the results of that work was actually a pretty significant reduction in our overall number of people experiencing homelessness. And I'll show you some of the data in a moment as well. But from 2018 to 22, we actually housed over 10,000 people out of our system. We created over 4,000 new exits to housing with those investments. And then we also created this incredible pipeline to build new units of supportive housing. We currently have over 600 in progress or already online. We also know that Atlanta is not unique in terms of the pressure that we are feeling around our unsheltered situation and the number of encampments that have been popping up around our community. There are all kinds of trends popping up around the country to try to resolve encampments. And through COVID actually, we have experienced some lessons learned in that work. We've seen everything across the spectrum in terms of communities' approaches, whether it is creating one-stop shops, legal enforcement challenges, to not being able to close encampments unless you have a bed-for-bed replacement for everybody in that encampment, to creating sanctioned camps, camping bans, and then on the other end of the spectrum, what some other communities are doing and what Atlanta is now moving towards, which is just housing people directly from encampments. With nothing really in between. And so what we saw with some of that work and are continuing to see through COVID, we were able to actually test some new strategies around encampment closures. And in the first round, what we called LIFT, now 1.0, we were able to coordinate $24 million in stimulus funds. We set an ambitious goal of housing 2,000 households, and we actually exceeded that goal. So we rapidly rehoused over 800 households. We closed over 10 encampments. We moved 250 people directly off the street and into housing. And then we used diversion as a new tool, which is just a shallow subsidy that helps people that don't need long-term support get into housing, pay first rent, security deposit, whatever it is that they might need to sort of bury or bust or problem solve to get folks out of homelessness. And we diverted over 1,200 households during that time. And so we're now in the process of LIFT 2.0. We are attempting to replicate and scale that work. We set a goal of 1,500 households to be rapidly rehoused, and I'll show you our progress against that work. And during that process of LIFT 1.0, in our 2022 data, we actually saw the direct correlation of what our system could achieve when we house people at the pace and scale with which we need to be operating as a system. We saw some pretty significant reductions. This is just a graphic of the encampments that we have been working on to date, and the numbers of individuals that have been housed out of those encampments. We are actively working the Cooper Street camp, which is in Mechanicsville, as we speak. And then as we add more capacity in staffing to our system right now, we'll be continuing to work on other encampments as well. Up to this date, we have been using a hotel to be able to house people temporarily in bridge housing. The hotel is actually closing at the end of this month. So that's what I meant by we will actually be testing some new strategies where we won't have an interim placement solution. Rather, we will be working with people in encampments and moving them directly into housing. So as far as our progress against the LIFT 2.0, to date, we've housed 867 households in the last 10 months or so. The breakdown is sort of where we house people by housing type. So it gets into a lot of detail that you don't necessarily have to be concerned about, but it does also kind of give you a picture of all of the different types of housing resources, many different funding streams that we are pairing together to try to create one type of housing solution for a household. As far as kind of where we are to date with numbers of people experiencing homelessness, this is our trend slide that we track, and this is based on our point-in-time count data. Have any of you ever participated in a point-in-time count? No? So this is a HUD-required activity that, as the lead agency, we're required to conduct. It is by no means a perfect science, but it's one tool in our toolbox that we use to gauge our progress against reducing and ending homelessness. We actually go out annually the third week in January, in the last 10 days, to survey people who are experiencing homelessness. This also includes data from our homeless management information system, where we collect data of people that are in shelter, that are in transitional housing on the night of the count. So it kind of gives you a picture of the total number of people that might be experiencing homelessness on any given night in our system. So in January of 23 of this year, it was 2,679, and you saw we had a pretty substantial increase in the number of people homeless in our system from 22 to 23.
Catheryn, just for clarification, the point-in-time count has no way, cannot include numbers of people who may lack their own shelter but are doubling up.
That's right.
Family members or friends.
Yeah, that
Sofa surfing or whatever.
couch surfing, that's right. Yeah, that's a great distinction. And actually, the Federal Department of Education has a different homeless definition. So when you see school system data on homeless families, their data will look wildly different from ours, because they do capture families that are doubling up or couch surfing or tripling up, who are housing insecure, might also be living in hotel stays, but are paying for their hotel stay. We cannot count a family that's paying for their own hotel stay. So HUD has a very strict definition, and there's rationale behind that, but our resources are incredibly limited. So they want to ensure that we are, one, counting people who are truly, literally homeless, and two, we are preserving resources for people who are literally homeless. But that is a distinction, yes. So our definition is you are unsheltered in a place not meant for human habitation. You could be sleeping in an abandoned building without utilities, or you are in emergency shelter or transitional housing. So our total number of people who are unsheltered this past January were 738. Majority of the people in our system are actually in shelter or transitional housing, as you can see. I just want to call your attention again. So in 21, we were in the throes of Lift 1.0 leading up to January of 22. By that point, we had made significant progress against that goal of housing 2,000 households. And so again, we saw this correlation of our numbers going down as a result of this very laser-focused effort on housing. Once those initial stimulus funds were spent and we hit the goal, we hit a cliff. And every community is talking about the stimulus cliff now at this point. All of our COCs around the country, in fact, I just got off a National Leadership Council call on Friday with my counterparts from all over the country, and everybody is saying our dollars are running out. We're about to face the cliff. We go back without stimulus dollars to those continuum of care funds from HUD, which really just only gives us housing placements through attrition, meaning Caring Works or Three Keys that operates the Imperial or O'Hearn House, if you're familiar with any of those programs. When somebody moves out, then we can house a new person. So we can only make housing placements in our system without things like stimulus funds through attrition. And so our rates of housing placement contract back to a system that's really only making about 30 to 40 placements per month. Yeah.
It's actually a two-part question. The first part is, how long does an individual have to be in that housing situation to be considered no longer homeless? And the second part of that is, do you have data on the rates of people falling back into homelessness?
Yeah. So once somebody is placed into housing, they are considered no longer homeless. And we do track returns to homelessness across all of our funded programs. In general, we have a less than 10% return rate across all of our housing programs. We actually have our performance dashboards on our website, and so you can go and look by project by quarter, how our programs are performing, and returns is one of our key metrics that we're looking at. And then similarly, we also are looking at and how many housing placements are we making. And again, during Lift 1.0, our housing placements skyrocket, and then our system contracts back. So our future, as far as this new strat plan, is really looking to how do we create and leverage and scale investments to be able to create a system that can be housing at the pace and scale that we need to keep these trends going in the right direction. And so really, we've made tremendous progress, and I think, some people would look at our reductions year over year and say, that's ridiculous. I don't see the correlation of that on the street. Perception is that homelessness is increasing. We've created a coordinated system. We've leveraged and aligned resources in a way that our system has never done before. But we are really viewing this from the lens of we are climbing a ginormous mountain at this point. And so we have made it a substantial way, but there is a significant ways to go. And just want to share a little bit more about some of the concrete projects that we are working on. So the supportive housing pipeline is one of our flagship initiatives. It came out of our initial strat plan and was made possible through the Homeless Opportunity Bond that was issued through actually the Reid administration and matched with private matching funds. We called this the Home First Initiative. We are investing 22 of that $25 million to build new units of supportive housing. So whereas some of our housing work, much of it through LIFT, is just going out and renting apartments in the rental market, relying on the availability of what is quickly decreasing affordable housing, paying rents for clients, helping them get back on their feet. Another key part of our work is actually investing in the infrastructure to build new units of supportive housing. So we built this pipeline in partnership with the Housing Authority and the county. We created what we call the three-legged stool for supportive housing. We prioritize supportive housing for people who are chronically homeless. That means somebody who has a long-term disabling condition and a long length of stay in homelessness. This individual needs a permanently subsidized unit. They will never be able to go on in the market and pay rent, even if it is quote unquote affordable. So that means we need a voucher. So the Housing Authority came alongside us and they committed to pay the rent for all 550 units that we developed for the next 30 years. And then the county came alongside us and said, and we will pay for the supportive services for those units. So we created the pipeline and it has been wildly successful. I don't know if any of you know Bruce Gunner, but a longtime affordable housing developer in our community, and when we initiated the pipeline, he said, nobody's gonna take $40,000 per unit. That's what we did during the Franklin administration. We said, well, we're gonna try it and see, and sure enough, if you build it, they will come, and it has provided a tremendous asset to developers as gap funding, as well as the subsidy, which is something that developers can take to the bank. They have guaranteed rent for every unit that we develop, and so that is something that you can take to the bank to get loans for in that guaranteed income. And so some of the units that we actually, so these are actually some of the units that we already have online now. We've got 55 Milton on the South Side Beltline Trail. We have Thrive Sweet Auburn right in the heart of the 4th Ward across from the King Memorial train station. Those are examples of brand new construction. And then on the bottom right-hand corner, we have Adair Lofts, which is example of a preservation of a historic building in Adair Park. We have 5 units there. And then in the upper left-hand corner is our first partnership with healthcare, which is Mercy Care's first endeavor into housing development. We have 4 additional developments that are coming online by the end of the year. We exceeded our goal of hitting 550 units with 610 now in the pipeline. And we are incredibly excited about the quality of the product that we're creating. Again, people experiencing chronically homeless are gonna move into housing. Within the broader community in brand newly constructed apartments, some of which are on the Beltline. And during the Bottoms administration, I presented some of the work to Cabinet, and Mayor Bottoms asked me, well, Cathryn, do we have any units in Buckhead yet in the pipeline? And I said, well, Mayor, no, we don't, but we do have units where all the cool kids want to live, so we have that going for us. But we are always open to that prospect, and many, many other units in the pipeline to come. And just because we are running low on time, I want to just jump ahead. We did launch our new community plan. This plan was just adopted by our governing board, presented to City Council and to the mayor. It is really building upon what we know is working with a new focus on equity and really incorporating people with lived experience. The reality in our system is that almost everyone experiencing homelessness in our system is African American, almost 90% of our population, majority men and single men. And so our homeless system is wildly disproportionate from a race standpoint, and even more so than most other communities in the country, which is shocking and appalling, really. And so we really want to hone into this, really help our system and our providers build capacity in this space of creating cultures that focus on anti-racism and cultural competencies and humility. And so this is going to be a driving component of our work. We will continue to hone in on our subpopulations with a particular focus on our unsheltered situation, as well as continuing to look at performance metrics around keeping people in housing and reducing returns to homelessness. And so some of the things that we're going to be focused on is, again, how do we achieve faster results? How do we do this work more intentionally with a greater sense of urgency? We will be targeting those rehousing strategies that we've been testing through COVID and hoping to continue those. We're going to be creating new opportunities for housing that I want to share a little bit more about with you about right now. So you may have heard in the news just in the last couple weeks, because we know that construction timelines are too long, right? We have 600 units in the pipeline, but some of those units won't be online for 2 to 3 years from now, and we simply don't have the time to wait. The mayor has charged us with creating an additional 500 units of what we're calling quick delivery housing or rapid housing. And this effort is a new initiative, again, innovation that we are testing to use city-owned public land and alternative housing products to be able to bring housing online faster. And the first initiative is actually using repurposed GEMA containers that were operating as ICU rooms around the state during COVID. They were set up in hospital parking lots in Macon and Albany. And now those hospitals are saying, we don't need these things anymore. Can you please get rid of them? And so GEMA has been, shopping this around for the last year or so, saying who will take these off our hands? And so we raised our hand and said, we'll take them, and we are going to actually repurpose them into permanent housing. We have broken ground already on a site in downtown at 184 Forsyth Street. We've hired a master developer for the first 150 units, and we've already made significant progress. So these are some of the renderings. The color scheme has actually changed, and we are going to have 40 units with 20 containers. They will all be studio apartments, essentially, in a tiny home living environment. So they're 125 square feet. Every unit has its own bathroom and kitchenette. 32 of the units will be ADA accessible, which is super exciting. And we will have a community room in that bottom corridor that will have offices for staff, a larger kitchen, and some group room space. We'll have a dog run for pets, which is exciting. Most of our programs do not allow pets, and that is a barrier. And we're always looking to see how can we create housing that is as low barrier as possible, because too many of our programs have too many barriers that keep people out, and that is the last thing that we want to do. This is just kind of a side view of what the program or the community will look like. And then this is actually the can't think of the word, the layout of the units themselves. These units are, if you heard the mayor this past week in his press conference, will be online by Christmas. And so we are working up against a very ambitious goal. We have another site identified already for the next property. We are looking at other types of housing products and evaluating all kinds of options. So whether it's a true to form, stick-built tiny home, using modular type of products or containers again. We are currently in the process of evaluating what that site might look like. And then we are looking at other sites to identify for this as well. The next site will actually be a land swap with Atlanta Public Schools. So again, getting creative with our other public partners about how we can use public land to do this work more cost effectively and more quickly. So that actually concludes my slides. I'd be happy to take questions. Yeah.
Thank you for everything. I noticed in the failure modes that you listed earlier, one of them was the landlord relationship, and then with the building of your own sites, I wanted to ask, do you guys have an arm that deals with property management as well? Do you partner with others to improve? I noticed you mentioned the anti-racism as being a barrier. Is that something where either you have that in your property management or you help train with the property managers? Because to me, it just seems like a potentially big barrier. And then the following question to that is, to what extent do you have people that kind of graduate out of your facilities into kind of, not being in the program?
Yeah, great question. So we think about it sort of in like 3 different buckets. One is we do housing just in the regular market, right? And some of you may have heard, I got a bunch of people sending me this NPR clip this week of an organization out in LA that is partnering with, their work is just going out and finding landlords that will partner and take vouchers and subsidies and house people coming out of our system. We actually have a similar nonprofit here called Open Doors. So as a part of our LIFT initiative, we contract with Open Doors, and their bread and butter, all they do as a nonprofit is build relationships with landlords all over the metro Atlanta area. So they go to landlords and they say, will you consider taking people coming out of homelessness? Will you take our rental subsidy? Because some of the way our housing works is we'll say, will you house Julia? But Julia has no income right now, and you need to put the lease in her name, but I'm gonna pay the rent for her for the next 6 months. She'll start paying rent eventually when she gets a job. And so some landlords are like, you want me to rent to somebody who has no income, who may have a poor rental history, may have an eviction on their background, may have a criminal background, any number of things. And so it's a big ask for us to get landlords to kind of get on board with that. So we contract with Open Doors, who handles all of that. And then separately for our pipeline, for the pictures I was showing you of the units we're developing, we have developers that have to come through an application process. And they have to present a tenant selection plan, and they have to tell us how are they gonna lower barriers, what is their experience with property management, with people who have been in homelessness, or just doing affordable housing in general, what training and support have they had. So we do provide training to them. Open Doors provides more support to sort of the market, if you will, landlords. And then for this latest development, we have an open RFP or procurement right now to select an operator, and those will be things that we'll be looking for. What is your experience? What's your cultural competency? How are you focused on making sure you know how to work with this population, that kind of thing. I forgot your second question. Oh yeah, so a lot of permanent supportive housing is permanent. People can stay in permanent supportive housing indefinitely. We have some long-time stayers in some of our housing programs, 20 plus years. Many folks do move out and they move on to other permanent housing destinations. Maybe they got their income, disability income, and maybe they found a partner and the two of them move out somewhere together. somebody got a job, they want to move on to another place to live, new apartment, whatever. So people move out of our housing subsidies frequently, or some of them have our tenant-based vouchers, and that voucher follows them. So they can move wherever they want to. They could go to Hawaii with our tenant-based vouchers if they wanted to. They move anywhere they want with that voucher. So it just depends on the household. Yeah.
In another time in this project, if you consider having a kitchen, a sort of communal kitchen for the apartments, where instead of folks having individual kitchens in their place, they could come to a cafeteria type of setting, and some could train as chefs maybe, and the bank would provide food, but I think that might be something to consider to just help income piece, and also getting other folks to contribute to that group.
Yeah, 100%. We do have some of our, O'Hearn House is an example of a program like that, where they're more of a single room occupancy, and there is a community kitchen where food is provided, and some of the residents can work in the kitchen and gain skills in culinary space. So there are some opportunities like that. Above and far and away, most people that we work with want their own place and aren't as interested in communal environments. And so we do try to focus our efforts on more individual space, because what we found is a number of people who are sleeping outside and are turning down more congregate environments are saying, I don't want to be around a bunch of people that I don't know. But to your point, I think we are trying to have sort of a diversity of options for people depending on what their desires are. Yeah.
What would be a typical activity routine for me to help your organization with people that you are trying to serve? I mean, what do you want me to do? How am I going to relate to the people that move in these units?
I might answer your question with a question, which is, what do you want to do?
Well,
or what are you good at? What is,
well, you know, what I'm listening to here is a large bureaucratic plan, but I don't know how a homeless person can relate to what this plan is. And it's a good idea, and I'd like to see it succeed, and I'd like to help, but I haven't heard from you how I could do that. And so how would I do that? How would a church member actually advance the goal of your organization on the ground, dealing with the people who live in these units?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think usually I say it really depends on your unique set of sort of skills and talents and interests in terms of where I would direct you to get involved. Everybody has their own skill sets. So if you're not good with people and you're not comfortable engaging with people who are experiencing homelessness, then by no means go out and do not go out and volunteer in that capacity. Or begin engaging people who are sleeping outside on Peachtree Street, right? So if your expertise is in finance, then I would say get involved with an organization, one of our nonprofits, or with our organization in that capacity.
Thank you, Catherine. Whoa, louder than usual. Sorry. Could I just interrupt for a second to speak to that very good question? An example, if, for example, you do have skills in finance, Buckhead Christian Ministries, now known as BCM Georgia, is always looking for people to help coach their financial skills programs to help people stay out of homelessness. But my main answer to that question is to tag on to Cathryn. Identify your interest, and then I would love to talk with any or all of you in this room about how I can help you get plugged in with existing ministries that we have with, gosh, almost 24 partner agencies in our community that help people with housing, food insecure, job training, you name it, there is a place to serve, and I would love to help you find that place.
Thank you.
Did I see? Yes.
Thanks, Cathryn. When you look at the cliff, right, that you mentioned, where is the primary cost that is confronting the success of the program, right? So with the stimulus dollars, you were able to achieve something, but without them, you're up against a cliff. So what's the primary cost to the program?
You mean how much, or what specific things we need to pay for?
I think what specific things do we need to pay for that will not be paid for by the stimulus funds that put people back into unsheltered living?
Primarily, it's rapid rehousing. So we, the majority of people, even though we hone in on our subpopulations, families, youth, veterans, chronics, the only housing intervention we use for chronically homeless is supportive housing. So we have that pipeline, we have other housing that we're developing, the rapid housing for chronically homeless, but virtually everybody else in our system, we would rehouse through rapid rehousing. And that is just flexible dollars, which is exactly what we use the stimulus funds for, that are time limited. So, and they're flexible based on the needs of the household, but it pays for rent, and it pays for supportive services. It also pays for things like security deposit, furniture, first and last month's rent, all of the things that it takes to get somebody into housing, and then to get them into employment, and then get them to begin paying the rent, and then we begin backing out. So it is primarily for the rapid rehousing intervention.
And you said time limited. What is that time limit before out and someone's self-sufficient?
It depends on the household. On average, it's about 6 months. With LIFT, we were prioritizing really a more vulnerable population, particularly unsheltered people. And so that was extended to more like 12 months. But one household might only need 3 months of assistance. Another household might need 12 to 18 months of assistance. But it varies. I would say anywhere from 6 to 12 months. Yeah.
How are these people plugged into the?
Right up here, so just at the top.
How are these programs plugged into the local healthcare system? In other words, are people taken by bus to, say, Grady or local healthcare facilities, or do the providers come on given days for health
Yeah,
care?
it varies. So Mercy Care is our primary healthcare for the homeless organization. They do primary care, behavioral health care, and dental. They have 13 clinics around the city that are embedded in shelter locations. They have 2 freestanding clinics. So when you talk to folks on the street, a lot of people will say, I go to Mercy Mobile. So that is common. They have a coach that they bring around to some shelters as well. And then they also have now a street medicine team. And the street medicine team is literally a doctor's clinic on wheels, and they are going to encampments. Good Samaritan on the west side is another resource that a lot of our programs use. They have a dedicated day, like homeless day, where they only serve people experiencing homelessness. And so they have partnerships with some of our outreach teams where folks will go there. They can kind of get all their needs met in one visit. And then the other primary resource is Grady. For specialty care, primarily, they have a large outpatient behavioral health care initiative or program. So between the 3 of those are sort of the primary healthcare delivery system. And most of our providers, outreach workers, case managers are very familiar with those entities. And we work very closely with both of them.
We maybe have like one more minute before godly play parents need to go and pick up your children. So maybe one last question.
Hi. Just one quick question. In the quarterback role for all of those organizations that you're talking about in the Atlanta area, are you looking at further reaching things like inclusionary zoning and educating the communities in this area about how they can provide more of those units that you can use in the future?
Yeah, that's a great question. I do sit on the board of the House ATL initiative, which is our, sort of community effort at advancing affordable housing. So we do get involved in those conversations. We do have a seat at the table in the affordable housing world. We are advocating strongly, and we have strong advocates within that world. Megan Shannon Volkovic with Enterprise, who's been leading some of that effort, is our governing council chair. And our nonprofit chair is Mark Pollack, who's also been an instrumental leader in the affordable housing world. So we have all these advocates that are also within the affordable housing space that are working to ensure that any new resources that are developed for affordable housing have some prioritization or carve out for homelessness as well. So that is a big policy push that we have been working to advance. We've not really tackled inclusionary zoning per se. It's really, our focus really in that space has been more about how do we create more investments in the space and ensure that, one, there's prioritization for people at the lowest end of the income spectrum. That helps us tremendously, as well as investments that are preserved for development for housing for people who are homeless specifically.
Cathryn, thank you. I think I may be off. Cathryn, thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you.